So welcome to another episode of the State of Mirrorless, our series of interviews with photographers and industry experts who use mirrorless camera systems. And today, connecting with us from Melbourne, Australia, is Lee Herbet, who will mostly talk with us about video, not so much about photography maybe, but you are also a photographer. I guess you do a bit of everything. If you want to, Lee, to introduce yourself, but first of all, welcome and thanks for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show. And thanks for, I know we had to kind of move schedules around so we could do this, so I really appreciate it. So a little bit about me. I worked for Apple in the Apple world for 10 years, and my focus there was training video editors, but also I did a little bit of photography on the side. And finally, about a year and a half ago, I went out on my own and started my own production company. So we now produce documentaries, music videos, corporate videos, things like that. But I also am very passionate about photography, and I absolutely love street photography, and switched from Canon DSLRs to mirrorless cameras sort of beginning of last year to the middle of last year, and my first mirrorless was an Olympus EM1, and I absolutely loved that camera. Unfortunately, the video elements of it weren't quite as good as the GH4, so my wife's got a very strict rule. She says, if you want a camera, you've got to sell a camera. So if I wanted the GH4, I had to sell the EM1.
We'll talk a bit about gear in a moment, but just wanted to mention that you are, like me, are a contributor to the F-Stop Lounge and frequent guest on This Week in Photo, right? So,
yes, yeah.
It's a fun show. I think everybody knows about This Week in Photo, but for those who don't, it's absolutely recommended. My favorite podcast ever.
Not this one?
No, well, no, I won't say it's, I cannot say that about my own show, but it would not be appropriate, I think.
Okay.
But some people like it, so I guess it has something going for it. But, no, This Week in Photo is a long-standing tradition, and it's great. So I always like it when you're on the show there.
Oh, thank you.
So, and you are you're actually now living in Melbourne, Australia, is that right? But you have a history of having lived in different places and so on. And as you said, you worked for Apple for 10 years. Can you maybe tell us a bit about your background? Why so many places, if you can tell?
There isn't really a reason that I used to joke around that, the reason why I move around so much is I just get bored easily. But so I've just always, my parents traveled a lot when I was young. So by the time I was 10, I'd lived in 2 countries, 3 states, and about 14 different houses. So I'm just used to moving, and I love experiencing different cultures and then learning different cultures. So travel is a really great way to do that. A little bit about my background. I also was a stand-up comedian for 15 years. I'm not funny anymore. And that really helps me sort of with my writing. I guess I try and put a little bit of humor in there to make it a bit more engaging and a bit more interesting for people. Great.
So let's get back to the gear talk. So you switched from Canon to mirrorless and for shooting video also, right? And can you tell us a bit about what is in your camera bag, or in other words, what is your typical equipment that you use for shooting?
So I've got a very mixed bag in my bag. I shoot with a Panasonic GH4. I've also got a Sony A7S. I've got a GX7, a Panasonic GX7, and I've got a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. So those are the cameras that I own. But then on some of the bigger jobs, I might use something a bit fancier, like a Sony F5 or an FS7, things like that. I wouldn't recommend for people to shoot with so many different brands, because particularly for video, trying to color match those cameras to each other, I've learned a lot more about color grading than I've ever wanted to, because the sensors from different manufacturers will always give you a little bit different sort of color matching. But the reason why I shoot with so many different cameras is I do a lot of training as well. So the logic for me in my mind is it's good to have access to those different systems, so that when I'm training people, if they've got all these different systems, I've got experience with all of them.
Good. For somebody who wanted to start in the world of video using a mirrorless system, I know that the camera is just one little piece of the equation, I think, because audio is very important, and I think other stuff. I think video is horribly complicated with respect to still photography. So I'm very bad at it, so I don't do much. So, but for something who wanted to get a bit more serious about video, what would be the essential basic kit that one would need to get in terms of what camera to start with, what lenses, audio, microphones, equipment, rigging, anything that the absolute minimum to start with, to do something that is, I mean, not professional, but at least good looking?
So, I mean, the absolute minimum, any camera really is going to be fine. As you said, audio is very important. So I would say audio is actually probably the most important thing when you're starting out, because you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube where something doesn't quite look right and you can't understand what's bothering you about it. Odds are it's because it's the audio. So to get a good microphone, and the key, I've actually written a couple of articles for Digital Rev about this, and the key for good audio is to get your microphone as close to what you're recording as possible. So even if you're just using your phone to record someone, put the phone in their pocket, and you'll be amazed how much better the audio is just by having it closer to their mouth. So, and in terms of microphones, there's a thing called a lav mic, which is a little microphone that you normally clip onto people. If you've ever watched the news, generally you'll see them with the lav mic on them. A really good cheap one to get started with is one called the Smartlav Plus by a company called Rode. I think it costs about somewhere between $60 and $70, and that will plug into your smartphone, and you can use it with a really cool app that is free to then record the audio directly onto your smartphone. So definitely go in looking for a microphone. In terms of cameras, really anything. The GX7 I think is still a great little camera for video. It's more the techniques that you want to learn with the camera. So understanding when to move the camera, when not to move the camera. In terms of lenses, I'm a bit of a prime snob, so I really love shooting with primes if I can. My favorite focal length is 35. So when I'm shooting, generally a 35mm lens will be living on one of my cameras. And then anything, also the 24 to 70 zoom equivalent is also really good because it gives you some really nice options. So for example, on the Panasonic GH4, I've got the kit 12 to 35 f2.8, which is the equivalent more or less to a 24 to 70 on a full frame. And I think that's also a really nice focal length to give you options.
Do you ever use specialty lenses on your cameras, like lenses designed for video specifically that you use through an adapter?
I do. I've got a couple of cinema lenses. So those are, I mean, you could use them for stills if you wanted to, but they've got called a declicked aperture. So you can adjust the aperture while you're shooting and you don't get that click of, we've gone from 1.9 to that and so on. And also that normally the cine lenses are nice and big. So yeah, the cine lenses are great, and I've got adapters for both my cameras. So I've got the Metabones adapters for the GH4 and the Sony, so I can get Canon EF mount lenses onto them.
Yeah, but you can get good results too with the, standard quote unquote Panasonic Olympus lenses for Micro Four Thirds, and
absolutely,
you don't need something specialistic.
No, not at all.
And I will second from the height of my ignorance, I will second your recommendation of getting a lav mic. I got one, even if it's a very cheap one. And when I shoot myself talking during some video, I connect it to my camera and place it on my label here. And the results are just much better than you would get with a different system.
Yeah.
Or with these things here.
Yeah, I find that
you don't see them in the video.
But also the biggest challenge I find, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and it, again, I'm being a snob here, but it really annoys me when I hear someone with a iPhone headphones and you can hear it scraping against their clothing, and you just want to say, just lean a little bit forward so that it's not touching your clothing, and that's always a challenge with those headphones.
Good tip. And for the record, I'm using these for listening.
Yeah,
but I'm using this microphone for. So I got a nice one. Hope it's Behringer C1U. Sounds. It's nice.
You sound good.
Good. So, can you maybe give a tip to our audience?
So a tip that I would give to the audience, I know this is probably a very sort of broad tip, but I'd say when you're thinking about video, think about your story, and think about. Actually, I've written an article that hasn't been published yet, but I'll give you a preview of it, where I talk about it's important when you start shooting video to think about how you're going to edit the video while you're shooting it. So, for example, I run a workshop that teaches photographers on how to move into video. And one of the first things that I have to teach them is I say to them, okay, so film someone walking through a door. And what they'll do, because as a photographer, you compose your shot, you take the shot, and that's all there is to it, is they'll pick up the camera, they'll push record, and they'll follow a person going through the door. And that's it. But when you shoot video, you wanted to use multiple angles to make the story more interesting and more dynamic. So the way I would shoot it as an editor is I would get a wide of the person walking towards the door in profile. Then I would get an over-the-shoulder shot of their hand reaching for the door handle. Then I would get a close-up of their hand turning the door handle. Then I need a medium shot from the other side of the door of them walking through the door. And so my tip would be, when you start shooting video, don't shoot something just once from one angle. Shoot it 2 or 3 times from different angles and different focal lengths. And you'll see when you go back to edit, having those extra shots really gives you more options to play with when you're telling a story.
Great tip. Do you use a lot of lighting equipment when you're shooting?
It depends. I try and avoid using lights where I can, because I like to travel as light as possible. No pun intended. But when I particularly when I'm doing interviews, you generally need to use lights. Also, with a lot of corporate interviews, they'll want the CEO in the corner office with the window behind them. And so if you want to expose for the scene behind the person, which is quite bright, and you don't want the person completely in shadow, you're going to have to put some lights on them. So normally I'll do sort of like a 2 or 3 point lighting setup with that, where a 2 point light, I'll just have a light above and sort of just off to the side to give them a little bit of shadow. And then I'll have a light almost opposite them, behind them. And what that does with the light coming behind the subject, that separates the subject from the background. So if you're ever trying to light an interview, don't have a light behind your subject, and they'll kind of mesh into the background. If you just put a light behind them, you'll see how just that little bit of light coming off their hair will just separate them from the background nicely.
Yeah, that's typical also for still photography, having a ring light to separate the subject from the background and so on. So I suspect that when you are in that situation where you have a bright outside showing through the window, you cannot just do an HDR.
Well, no, it would take. I'd have to get the person to sit still for a very long time for that.
I was reading about new cameras with incredible high dynamic range and so on that might one day let us be able to capture more dynamic range in video and maybe use less lighting in those situations. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's a big difference there where, for example, with the Blackmagic camera that I've got, that shoots raw video. So that's the same as shooting raw photos, where it's capturing as much information as possible. So when you get into post, you've got a lot of color information to work with. The thing to keep in mind, so you might say, well, why don't I shoot raw all the time? Well, if you think about it, video is 25 frames for every second. And with that raw camera, every frame is 40 megabytes. So very quickly you fill up a memory card, and very quickly your computer needs to be very powerful. So unless you absolutely have to shoot in raw video is a bag of hurt you don't want to touch.
Yeah, sure. Makes sense. All right. So at this point, we would normally ask our guest to show some of their photos and talk about it, but we are mostly talking about video. So I was recently following you, and you had this video that was selected for a film festival. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So this short documentary that I made actually was a complete, almost accident. My wife and I were on holiday in Israel last year, and we went to have dinner at this place called Knafe Noga, which was recommended to us. And while we were going to pay for our dinner, we started talking to the owner, and he just seemed like a really interesting guy. And I said to him, hey, look, I'm a filmmaker. Do you mind if I come back in a couple of days with my cameras and just interview you? Because you seem like you would have some really interesting stories. And he said, yeah, sure, no problem. So originally I just thought, he's a nice guy. I'll do a little promo for him that he can put on his website or something like that. But when I got home and I started looking through the footage, there was just so much interesting stuff that he talked about. I thought, I could actually make a short little documentary out of this. So I just ended up making this short documentary, and I put it forward for the Cineade Film Festival in Texas, and it got accepted. So that's a little feather in my cap that I'm pretty proud of.
Great. What is it about in particular? I mean, is you're talking about his place, and I don't know what. Can you tell us a bit more?
He's talking about. So knafe is this traditional Arab dessert that is normally made sort of in the middle of nowhere, and every country in the Middle East calls it something a little bit different, and it's made slightly differently depending on the country. And this British Jewish guy came over from England, and he started making this knafe place, and it started becoming popular. And since it's a dessert, it's normally just a dessert, but he thought, well, let's get creative. So he's made vegan versions, and he's working on gluten-free versions, and he's made it into a meal. Like he'll serve it with, sweet potato and hummus and salads. And he's just really creative. And it was also nice where he was talking about how all of his suppliers are Arabs, and he gets along with them just fine. And how he talks about how, everyone thinks that in Israel it's all about conflict and everyone fighting each other, but he was telling a story about how, normal people on the ground actually from both sides get along quite well. And for me, that was something that I really, a part of the story that I really wanted to tell, because, mostly you hear about Israel and the Palestinians just fighting each other all the time. And it was nice to hear a positive story out of that area of the world.
Okay. So we cannot show the video during our interview as we would normally do with stills, but we will put a link in the blog post for this interview and maybe embed the video, so if that's possible, so people can have a look for themselves. And I think I've watched it, and it's really interesting, and of course, well produced and shot.
Oh, thank you.
Goes without saying. My next question would be: can you share anything about you that not many people know?
Okay, something that not many people would know about me. When I finished high school, my first job out of high school was in musical theater. So anyone, you see me sitting down, but I'm quite short and quite overweight. So to think of me as a dancer, you wouldn't quite think. But 20 years ago, I was a bit spriter, and yeah, so I used to be a dancer.
Wow, 20 years ago, you look so young.
Oh, I'm older than I look.
You must have been 8 then.
Oh, 19, yeah.
Yeah, you look younger than that. Okay, so where can people go and find more about you online?
Well, on all the social medias, so on Google Plus, I'm lee.herbet at gmail.com. On Twitter and on Instagram, I'm Lee Herbet. Just one other thing, Herbet is spelled Herbet, only with one R. Apparently that's the German spelling, very efficient. They only need the one R. My grandfather was German. And my website is capturingpassion.com. So you can also find all the things about me over there on capturingpassion.com.
And you are also a contributor to, we already mentioned F-Stop Lounge and This Week in Photo and Digital Rev too, right?
Yeah.
So you are a bit all over the place, which is great. Okay. Anything else you want to add before we say goodbye?
I suppose I know I can't help, I love teaching. So the only other thing that I would say in terms of if people are thinking about going into video is go out and learn. And the best way to learn is to just do it and to experience and watch TV. Like you'll be amazed how much you can learn. Like my wife always complains that I've ruined TVs and movie for her because she'll be watching TV and she's, oh, that slider shot wasn't very good. Or, oh, I like how they use that low angle. And she like sort of turns and looks at me and says, I know these things because of you. Damn you. So if you watch these things with a slightly clinical eye, you'll notice tricks that filmmakers use to create an emotion for you.
Yeah, it spoils the fun a bit. Maybe. Like when we're photographers and when we see other people's photographs, we tend to always see them with a bit of a clinical eye, as you say.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we might lose sight of the big picture of the emotion that it conveys, and we say, oh, the guy used light was there, so he like for a portrait he might have used the rim light together with the key light, or if it's a landscape it was the golden hour and the sun was there, so this might have been morning or even
what focal length was that?
Yeah.
But you know what, on the other side, I'll also say that in film editors circles there's a saying, and I love the saying. It says, no job is ever finished, you just run out of time and money. So don't get too worked up about, oh, I can't get this right and I can't get that right. Like for me, every single job that I've done, I look back on it and I can always find things I could have done better. But every time you do it, you'll learn a new skill and you'll learn a new thing, and you'll just, the best way to learn is to do. And you also offer workshops. Do you do them out of Melbourne or other locations? Yes. So I run workshops generally for photographers, but anyone's welcome to come and learn how to move from stills to motion. We run them in Melbourne and in Sydney, but if anyone wants to pay for me to go overseas, I'm more than happy to come and teach you wherever you are. I'm a bit far away from you. So I would love to learn more about video, but that would be a bit expensive, either me coming to Melbourne or you coming to Italy. But who knows, maybe one day during travels we might meet up. Absolutely. And you will tell me a bit of your secrets about shooting video, which, as I said, it's much more complicated than stills, at least for me. I think it's anything's easy once you know. Yeah. So I guarantee you're a much better photographer than I am. So it's just what people sort of fall into. That's where their passions lie, and that's where their expertise go. Oh, sorry, I'm just, my wife's iPad's next to me, just ringing away. I'll just shut that down.
No worries.
Sorry.
All right, so I would like to thank you for being with us today. I think this was very informative and fun, so I'm sure our viewers will appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.